After defeating the Nervii in 57 BC, Caesar, who was returning to the province of Transalpine Gaul to tend to his administrative duties as proconsul, sent Crassus's son, Publius Crassus, to the coastal lands of Amorica in the area that would become known as Brittany, to help pave the way for his intended invasion of Britain, which Caesar arranged to coincide with the 56 BC campaign season. While Caesar reported back that most of Gaul had surrendered to the might of Rome, the Amorica coastal tribes, such as the Venetii and Ossismi, likely thought they were making alliances with Rome. However, when Publius Crassus arrived to direct the taking of Venetii hostages, the coastal tribes realized they had been counted among Caesar's conquests. As bargaining chips, for getting their own people back, the Venetii in turn took hostages from among those sent by Rome to demand grain to sustain Caesar's vast legions throughout the winter. Caesar, in his Gallic commentaries, claims that all the coastal tribes in the region then bound themselves by sacred oath to assist the Venetii in bringing down Rome. Strabo, however, tells us that the Venetii opposed Rome on the grounds that an invasion of Britain would disrupt their trade, crippling the livelihood of all the coastland tribes who traded with Britain. Learning of the uprising in Amorica, Caesar, who was on his way to Illyricum, ordered a fleet of ships be built over the winter, employing pacified Gallic tribes such as the Pictones and Samtones. Placing one of his legates, Decimus Junius Brutus Albinus, in command of these upcoming fleets, Caesar planned to rejoin his legions in Gaul as soon as the campaigning season began. In Rome, however, things were not going well. Caesar's partners in the triumvirate were reacting to Caesar's success in Gaul. As Caesar won battle after battle, driving his way through Gaul, and adding more and more territory to the Roman Empire, Pompeius and Crassus were endeavoring to puff up each his own stature. With Ptolemy Auletes in Rome, discussion of a campaign into Egypt had both triumvirs vying for the position of leading the campaign. Additionally, with Cicero back from exile, the orator was again a threat to Caesar as a bridge to reunite Pompeius with the Senate. If at the time of the triumvirate's conception, Caesar was the tool through whom Pompeius and Crassus intended to fulfill their agendas, things had now changed. In 59 BC, during Caesar's consulship, he began posting Senate business in the Forum Romanum for the public to read. Caesar's original intention was to put public pressure on his conservative opposition. However, it proved to be an even more useful enterprise than Caesar had imagined. Adding to the official business, things like death, birth, and marriage notices, along with the results of chariot races and gladiatorial contests, and even light witticisms, Caesar's daily gazette, called the Acta Diurna, was even copied by scribes, and sent to governors in their provinces who wished to keep abreast of events within the city of Rome. And through the Acta Diurna, Caesar kept Rome, and by extension, the empire, informed of his astounding achievements in the course of the Gallic campaign. Referring to himself in the third person, Caesar wrote the scripts as he wanted them recited by the newsreaders. In this way, Caesar both created and controlled the public narrative surrounding his conquest of Gaul. Despite what the Senate said was really going on, the people waited for reports on Gaul, anxious to hear of Caesar's latest advancement. He kept them interested, and emotionally invested in his progress by the naming of men who performed well, and by honoring those who died well. Until the Acta Diurna, the only people important enough to be mentioned in official dispatches were those who were already important. But Caesar made local celebrities out of the common people who marched in his legions. Family members and friends burst with pride to hear a familiar name, knowing that Caesar's finding them worthy of mention gave them enduring fame, proven by the fact that two first-rank centurions named Lucius Vorenus and Titus Pullo, who were rivals, competing against one another for honors, are still popular figures today. By controlling the narrative surrounding his Gallic conquests, Caesar also made it difficult for the Senate to criticize a man whose name was on everyone's lips. Unfortunately, Pompeius, formerly cheered by the crowds, was not only declining in his public image, but was at odds with the Senate. And Crassus, usually content to work behind the scenes, was suddenly aware of the chasm of popularity between himself and Caesar. Yet despite skyrocketing in popularity, Caesar's star threatened to tumble back to earth just as quickly. Cato, that bellwether of the Boni, was pushing Senate conservatives to rally in support of his brother-in-law, Lucius Domitius Aenobarbus, for the 55 BC consulship. Lucius Domitius was the son of the Gnaeus Domitius Aenobarbus, who had been Rome's Pontifex Maximus prior to Metellus Pius. His uncle, another Lucius Domitius Aenobarbus, was a supporter of Sulla and, as such, was executed on the orders of Caesar's cousin, Gaius Marius the Younger, in 82 BC. His older brother, Gnaeus Domitius, had been the one-time brother-in-law of Caesar and, like Caesar, was proscribed by Sulla, forcing him to flee Rome before he was ultimately killed by Pompeius Magnus in Africa. Not only did Lucius Domitius Aenobarbus hate Caesar on an ideological level, but he had reasons to despise Pompeius Magnus as well. His winning the consulship would be a threat to them all. On his way to Sardinia, Pompeius Magnus met Caesar in the town of Lucca. There, Pompeius offered Caesar a warning. The Senate was just as ready to devour Caesar as Pompeius. Successfully alienating Pompeius from the Senate, Caesar failed to realize that it was their hatred of Pompeius, sitting right there within the city, which kept them from directing their rage against him. But Cicero, hoping to test Pompeius's loyalty to the triumvirate, had demonstrated just how ready the Senate was to attack Caesar as well. And if Caesar and Pompeius could be brought down by the Senate, then Crassus, who had paid a separate visit to Caesar at the town of Ravenna, would not be far behind. In the beginning, each had joined the triumvirate for personal gain. Caesar, to pass his agrarian land bill, and get himself appointed proconsul of Gaul; Pompeius, to finalize the ratification of his eastern conquests; and Crassus, to legislate relief for the Publicani. Each also intended to outmaneuver the other two triumvirates, to increase his own prestige. But now, they needed one another as protection from the Senate. If Aenobarbus won election as consul, that was the end of Caesar. At best, he could hope for exile from Rome; at worst, execution. Because the Boni who supported Aenobarbus were convinced Pompeius meant to install himself as dictator of Rome, Pompeius could also expect exile or death. And Crassus had openly revealed that he was the primary source of financial support for Publius Clodius's violent attacks all over the city. The Boni, despite their attachment to Rome's conservative party, were ready to completely remove the stench of Sulla and Marius from Rome's memory, by getting rid of the last of their political heirs, Crassus, Pompeius, and Caesar. We are told by some that the conference at Lucca, with an alleged attendance of some 120 senators with fasces, was a later invention of historians. Whether true or not, Crassus did meet with Caesar in Ravenna, and Pompeius met with him at Lucca. After these meetings, the triumvirs were suddenly on the same page. It was agreed that Pompeius and Crassus would run for the 55 BC consulship on a joint ticket. And, to make certain they won, Caesar would send one of his legions to Rome in order to increase the votes for Pompeius and Crassus. Unfortunately, as the campaign season was beginning, Caesar had to deal with a revolt in Armorica, and a planned invasion of Britain, and could not send that legion until the end of the war season. This meant that Publius Clodius, and his armed gangs, had to interrupt any attempts to hold consular elections, until Caesar's soldiers reached Rome. But Pompeius wanted more. It was time to take control of Clodius. Whether his taunts came from Caesar or Crassus, Pompeius would tolerate no more insults from Publius Clodius Pulcher. And so, a pact was made with Publius Clodius. If he would use his gangs, and his charismatic power with the people, to support the candidacies of both Crassus and Pompeius, then all three members of the triumvirate would throw their support behind Clodius's brother, Appius Claudius, guaranteeing his election to the 54 BC consulship. But first, Clodius had to do his part. No consular support for Pompeius meant no consular support for Clodius's brother. Clodius had to work for the triumvirate as a whole, or be cut loose completely. Once in the consulship, Pompeius and Crassus would legislate a 5-year extension of Caesar's proconsulship of Gaul. This would keep Caesar covered in imperium for a total of 10 years, after which he could legally run for the consulship again, renewing his imperium, and carrying its prosecutorial immunity into his next proconsulship. And for their own protection against indictment, Crassus and Pompeius would legislate 5-year terms for the proconsulships following their terms as consuls. Finally, after almost 4 years, the unsteady alliance of the first triumvirate was solidified. All three triumvirs could now pursue their individual goals without interference from the others.